For most of human history, seeds were a shared inheritance. Farmers saved them, traded them, adapted them to local soil and climate. This simple ancient practice built genetic diversity, resilience, and food security over thousands of years. During this time, a farmer didn't need a rule book to tell him how to treat the land because his father had already shown him how to do that, and his father before him. The soil benefited from those decades of decisions just like the people did. Care wasn't efficient by today's business standards, but it was durable and it was proven. It could have lasted forever. But then something changed. Decisions were pulled away from places and people and handed to systems that didn't have to live with the consequences. Ownership replaced stewardship. That is the core problem with why modern, high-tech, advanced analytics economy will consume itself and everything else with it. The modern economy is essentially the nothing from the never-ending story. Short-term yield replaced long-term health. And slowly, almost invisibly, the knowledge that once passed from hand to hand began to disappear. It was shunned and discouraged, no longer necessary. Now, this isn't a story about nostalgia. It's a story about what happens when care is removed from the system we depend upon. Because when stewardship dies in farming, that tragedy doesn't stay on the farm. It shows up in our water, our housing, our labor, our data. It even consumes our future. And once you see that pattern, you realize this isn't about the past at all. It's about whether we still remember how to care and whether we're willing to rebuild a faulty system and allow humanity and life on our planet to survive. Long before laboratories, peer review, or even the scientific method had a name, farmers were already practicing what would become science. They observed patterns, they tested variables, they learned from failure, adaptation, and patience. A farmer knew which soil held water and which drained too fast, which crops survived a late frost, which seeds produced stronger plants when saved and replanted. This knowledge wasn't written down, it was lived, passed from hand to hand, literally, generation to generation. Empirical, cumulative, and critically, deeply local. Selective breeding, one of the most powerful scientific achievements in human history, didn't begin in universities. It began in fields. Farmers noticed traits. They saved seed from the healthiest plants. They crossed varieties intentionally, and over centuries they transformed wild grasses into wheat, corn, and rice. Modern genetics didn't invent this process, it just explained it. So here's a question worth asking. Is it beneficial to move away from lived, place-based knowledge with systems designed far away from the land that they control? For much of human history, seeds were mankind's most powerful tool in survival. The very idea of a farmer not saving seeds was probably seen as irresponsible. Seeds are, after all, future food, directly from nature. No one should control them or limit who can have them. In fact, there is nothing more natural than a seed being dispersed and yielding more food. It is the perfect system. But when someone had the idea to create seeds that could be, in essence, weaponized, slowly, methodically, seeds were redefined and they became something else. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Diamond versus Chakrabarty that a genetically modified organism could be patented. For the first time, life itself entered the legal system as intellectual property. This was a legal earthquake. From that moment on, a seed was no longer just a biological organism, it was licensed technology. Saving seed could violate patent law. Replanting carried legal risk. Farmers moved from owners to licensees. It was the beginning of a dark new chapter in farming, a profession which had been from the very beginning of history as noble and important as any pursuit mankind has ever dreamt up. And no company pursued this shift more aggressively than Monsanto. Through the 80s and 90s, Monsanto developed Roundup-ready crops, seeds engineered to survive glyphosate, a herbicide classified by the World Health Organization as probably carcinogenic to humans. and bundled them with the weed-killing chemical itself. Farmers didn't just buy seeds, they entered a closed system. Buy the seed, buy the chemical, sign a contract prohibiting seed saving. Things were very different. Now they're in a loop. Ask yourself, is that innovation or is it control disguised as convenience? Quick side note, I just mentioned that glyphosates are listed as probably carcinogenic to humans. I assume that vagary is due to some type of legal talk and chemical companies providing their own data from their own scientists. Fine. However, it should be noted that glyphosates do damage soil health by killing many of the organisms and bacteria that we know help our food grow and produce nutrient-rich fruits and vegetables. Back to the story. To be clear, farmers purchasing seeds is not a new thing. Even a century ago, buying seed to save time, access new varieties, or recover from a bad season was normal commerce. The shift wasn't buying seeds, it was losing the right to reuse them. Early genetically engineered seeds promised higher short-term yields, labor savings, and simplified weed management. For farmers operating on thin margins, this was a very big, very attractive prospect. Adoption was completely rational, but the trap was set for after adoption. Seed saving faded. I mean, it was illegal now, right? Regional varieties disappeared and gave way to monocultures. Independent seed companies were bought out and their numbers shrank dramatically. Public seed breeding programs were defunded. Today, a small number of companies commonly referred to as the Big Four, Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, and BASF control close to 60% of the global proprietary seed market, a significant increase in consolidation from past decades thanks to major mergers in the mid-2010s. These companies dominate both the seed and the agrochemical sectors, influencing crop diversity and pricing. These companies are more involved in what's grown than farmers. So now what was convenience has become necessity, virtually a requirement. The ability to make a decision about what you grow was severely limited. Exit costs skyrocketed. This is critical to understand. Before these biotech and chemical agro companies got involved, if a farmer had a bad year, they could save seed, switch varieties, trade with neighbors, reduce inputs, adapt conditions. The cost of changing course was mainly labor and time, not debt or legal risk. You could experiment, you could recover from a bad year, you could pivot. But once farmers adopted patented seeds and chemical systems, leaving meant facing profound penalties. After all, they had purchased specialized equipment to match specific seeds and chemicals. Annual seed and chemical contracts were baked into operating loans. Debt was structured around expected yields from that system. Leaving the system often meant lower yields during the transitional period, losing access to financing, immediate cash flow collapse, and don't forget, fields could remain contaminated with patented seeds, which means farmers risked lawsuits even after trying to stop using those patented seeds. In other words, you could try to leave, but the legal exposure would be daunting. Farmers weren't staying because the system worked well. They were staying because leaving threatened their survival. This modern industrial corporate system is path dependence, the same pattern we now see in subscription software, planned obsolescence, and privatized utilities. It's important to remember that no one took farmers' seeds away. It was a methodical, hostile takeover of a system that worked for the masses for thousands of years. A system that now worked for the very few at the very top. The financial pressure was relentless. Seed prices rose, input costs climbed, debt became permanent. Obviously, this led to an enormous amount of mental pressure on farmers as debt piled up and more money was needed. In India, adoption of patented cotton seeds coincided with the rising input cost and crop failures, contributing to a documented agrarian crisis. In the United States, farmers are now several times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. This isn't anecdotal, it's public health data. And the ecological cost? Genetic monoculture. Listen to this. In 1903, there were hundreds of varieties of lettuce. By 1983, there were only a few dozen. Tomatoes, peas, and beets experienced similar declines. Thousands of locally adopted seed varieties vanished, replaced by a handful of uniform crops that lack diversity, makes crops more vulnerable to disease, climate stress, and other forms of collapse. Are those risks worth it just to ensure a higher profit at the top? Wendell Berry, author of the highly respected and influential The Unsettling of America, warned us about this more than 50 years ago. In The Unsettling of America, he wrote that when farming is reduced to an industrial process, the land suffers, the farmer suffers, and the community suffers. His argument wasn't sentimental, it was structural. Berry understood that once people who are connected to the land are removed from the decision making, once they're forced to follow systems they didn't design and cannot change, care gives way to compliance. Wisdom gives way to survival. Chemical agriculture doesn't seek to cooperate with nature. Its goal was to override it. Where farmers once adapted to soil, weather, and ecology, industrial systems try to force uniform outcomes regardless of consequences. As Berry put it, whether we and our politicians know it or not, nature is party to all our deals and decisions, and she has more votes, a longer memory, and a sterner sense of justice than we do. You can ignore nature's judgment for a while, but you cannot escape it. This story doesn't end at the farm gate. The same logic that defined farming has also infected data, where human behavior is now extracted and monetized instead of respected. Housing, where shelter became a speculative asset, and labor, where long-term relationships were replaced with disposable transactions. And also water, where right now an approaching crisis will soon become a billion-dollar market as corporations are already buying up water rights across the planet. In every case, stewardship was replaced by ownership. And ownership, untethered from responsibility, always seeks growth without regard for consequence. Look no further than plastic for an example of literally destroying the planet for cheap convenience. A society rooted in stewardship plans for the long term because it believes it has a future. A society built on extraction behaves like there is no tomorrow. This wasn't inevitable. You can't compare what happened to farmers to the arrival of railroads or airplanes in a modern world. It was methodical by laws, by courts, by corporations, by political systems that rewarded short-term profit over long-term care. Farmers are as valuable to society as any profession can ever hope to be. By removing their input from the profession, a monumental disservice has happened to all of us, everywhere. But because it was chosen and not inevitable, it can be reversed. It can be undone. Seed libraries are re-emerging. Farmers are rebuilding soil instead of stripping it. Communities are finally becoming more aggressive and determined in reclaiming water from foes like data centers. They're tackling affordable housing and prioritizing that workforces are treated with respect and compensated properly. To be clear, all of those aforementioned efforts need to be approached as relationships within a community, not assets to be exploited by oligarchs or private equity from afar. Hope doesn't come from pretending harm didn't happen. It comes from recognizing the pattern and deciding deliberately to build something different. As a nation, we are at the point that if we don't start insisting on big change in many systems, it could take decades, if not lifetimes, to repair. Politicians always fret that we can't afford important elements like clean water, clean air, fair-paying jobs, affordable health care, or restoring a damaged environment, but then insist on giving billionaires money who then simply turned around and pay the same political cowards for their obedience. We have to change this. The question isn't, can we afford stewardship? The question is, do we have the will to demand that necessary change? When we see a system that treats farmers fairly, removes the greedy middlemen and market manipulators, and allows farmers, the backbone of society, to breathe easier while they work to feed the world, then we'll know we're on the right path. If this content resonates with you, please subscribe. You may also want to check out my award-winning documentary, somehow hopeful, the story of a woodsman. You can find it on most streaming platforms, and it expands many of the themes mentioned in this video. Thanks for watching.